The Galactic Council mocked humanity as cowards until the human fleets arrived. Part 1: The Weight of Empty Chairs. The laughter started before I even finished my sentence. I had been speaking for less than 30 seconds, a calm, measured response to the Vreth Dominion's formal accusation, when the sound rippled through the chamber like a wave. It was not the polite, restrained kind of laughter that diplomats sometimes use to deflect an awkward moment. It was the open, unashamed kind. The kind that says, "We do not consider you worth the effort of pretending." I stopped speaking. I stood at the human delegation's podium, a narrow, pale structure near the rear left of the Grand Conclave floor, and I let the sound wash over me. 47 species, represented by their finest minds, their sharpest voices, their most decorated ambassadors, and every single one of them was either laughing or smiling in a way that meant the same thing. My name is Kale Marin. I have held the title of Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council for 11 years. Before that, I spent 22 years in the Martian Defense Corps, where I learned, among other things, that the most dangerous moment in any confrontation is not when the other side raises its weapon. It is when they stop taking you seriously. I waited for the laughter to settle. The Grand Conclave chamber was enormous by any standard, a hollowed sphere carved directly into the rock of asteroid Primus, an ancient way station sitting at the gravitational midpoint between 4 major star systems. The walls curved inward above us and were lined with observation galleries, each one filled with delegation staff, analysts, and junior attachés watching the proceedings in real time. The floor was a wide, circular platform of polished dark stone, ringed by delegation podiums arranged in a precise horseshoe. At the open end of that horseshoe sat the council chair, a tall, silver-framed seat occupied by First Speaker Orvin of the Lethian Collective, a calm and ancient being who had been moderating galactic disputes for longer than most of humanity's written history. The human podium was near the back. It had always been near the back. Councillor Ithari of the Vreth Dominion stood at the primary speaker's position, the elevated central dais reserved for whoever held the floor. He was tall and angular, with a long, pale face and 4 arms that he kept folded across his chest, in a posture that I had come to recognize as Vreth for dismissal. He had just finished presenting what he called an evidence package, a detailed record of human military conduct over the past 18 months, specifically our response to the Outer Fringe raids. The raids had been bold. 3 human border systems, Cassini Station, the Helios Outpost, and the civilian agricultural colony on Dren IV, had been struck in rapid succession by Vreth-aligned raider fleets. Cargo seized. Infrastructure damaged. 2 people injured, none fatally, because our evacuation protocols had activated within minutes. And then, rather than launching a counterstrike, the human fleet stationed in the region had executed a full tactical withdrawal. Clean, orderly, and complete. The Council had noted it. The galaxy had noted it. And now Ithari was making sure that everyone noted it one more time, with added commentary. "The human response," he said, his translator rendering his voice into crisp, clipped words, consisted of what their own military command described as a strategic redeployment. 3 systems were struck. Human assets retreated. No counter-engagement was attempted. No retaliation was mounted. He let the silence sit for a moment. "I submit to this council that humanity's continued presence as a recognized interstellar power is, at this point, a matter of tradition rather than fact. They are a species that calculates survival over principle. They are merchants who wear the titles of soldiers. They are," and here he paused, and in that pause I could hear the performance of it, the deliberate theatricality, "cowards." The laughter came then. I had been watching Ithari's face through the whole speech and I had known it was coming. That single word, cowards, was not an accident. It was a choice. A public, recorded, translated choice, entered into the official proceedings of the Galactic Council. He wanted it on the record. He wanted every delegation, every junior analyst in every observation gallery, every species monitoring the Council feed from their home systems, To hear a representative of the Vreth Dominion call humanity cowards and hear nothing forceful come back. When the laughter faded, first speaker Orvin gestured toward the human podium with two fingers, the standard invitation to respond. I walked to the dais slowly, not because I was nervous, because I have found over 11 years of diplomacy that the pace at which you move toward a podium tells the room a great deal about how much you feel you need to rush. I did not feel I needed to rush. I adjusted the speaker's microphone. I looked out at 47 delegations. I looked at Ithari, who had returned to his seat and was already engaged in a quiet side conversation with his attaché, as though my response was too predictable to bother waiting for. I said, "We noted the incursion." 5 words. That was my entire response. I let them sit in the air for a moment, then I returned to my seat. The laughter that followed was louder than the first round. Someone in the Vreth gallery made a sound that their species uses the way humans use a dismissive wave. The Lethian delegation, typically among the more reserved presences in the chamber, exchanged a glance that I read as something between pity and amusement. Even first speaker Orvin, to his credit, kept his expression neutral, though I noticed he did not intervene. I sat down, folded my hands on the table in front of me, and kept my face completely still. My attaché, a young man named Owen Price who had been with the mission for 2 years and was still learning when to speak and when not to, leaned toward me with wide eyes. He whispered, "That's it. That's all we're saying." I did not look at him. I said very quietly, "That's all they need to hear." He did not understand. I did not expect him to, not yet. What Owen did not know, what no one in that chamber knew except for me, was that I had read the mobilization orders 4 months ago. I had sat in a secure briefing room on Ganymede Station with 3 members of Earth's Joint Strategic Command, and I had been walked through a plan so precise, so carefully constructed, so deeply patient in its design, that it had taken me a full day afterward before I could speak about it without my hands trembling. Not from fear, from something else entirely. From recognition. I had served long enough and fought enough to know what a real trap looks like. Not the quick, reactive kind, the kind where you respond to a provocation with an equal provocation and both sides walk away hurt. The real kind, the slow kind, the kind that requires you to absorb humiliation as a cost of doing business, to let the other side read your silence as weakness, to give them every reason to push further, exactly as far as you need them to push. The withdrawal from the outer fringe had not been a retreat, it had been an invitation. And seated in the grand conclave chamber, surrounded by 47 species who believed with complete confidence that humanity was afraid, I allowed myself exactly one private thought before turning my attention back to the proceedings. They will understand soon enough. The session continued for another 3 hours. Various delegations weighed in on the Vreth evidence package. The consensus, politely worded but unmistakable, was that humanity's standing in the council had been damaged. The Lethian collective's representative suggested, gently, that perhaps Earth should consider a more assertive posture to maintain its credibility. The Andral Federation, small, careful, always reading the political winds, abstained from the discussion entirely. The Vreth sat with the self-satisfied stillness of people who had already won the day and knew it. When the session ended, I walked out through the wide corridor of Asteroid Primus's main concourse and found a window, a long, rectangular viewport looking out into open space, and I stood there for a while, watching the stars. Owen came to stand beside me. He was quiet for a moment, which I appreciated. Then he said, "They really don't like us, do they?" It was not quite a question. "Some of them don't," I said. "Some of them are simply reading a ledger and coming to what they believe is a rational conclusion. Ithari is neither. He's pushing. He's testing how far we'll absorb before we react. And we're just going to keep absorbing." I turned away from the window. "Owen," I said, "do you know what the most expensive thing in any conflict is?" He thought about it. "Firepower." "Time," I said. "The side that can afford to spend more of it wins. We have been spending time very carefully for a very long while. I started walking. Make sure the next session report is filed before midnight, and get some rest. The days ahead are going to require you to be sharp. I left him standing at the window, looking at the stars, and I walked back toward the human missions quarters with the particular calm of a man who knows something the rest of the room does not. It is a strange kind of feeling, heavy and clean and very, very quiet. Part 2. What Cowards Do in the Dark. The Council's formal censure of Earth arrived 6 weeks after that first session, and it was, by any diplomatic standard, a thorough document. 17 pages, signed by 31 of the 47 recognized member species. It cited humanity's failure to respond to the outer fringe raids as a violation of what the Council called the doctrine of proportional engagement, an informal but widely observed principle that stated any recognized interstellar power had both the right and the implied obligation to defend its territories against unlawful aggression. By withdrawing our fleets, the document argued, we had not only abandoned our own people, but had also signaled to the broader galactic community that human-controlled space was, in practical terms, undefended. The language was careful, diplomatic, but the meaning underneath it was not subtle. My government's response arrived on my desk the following morning. It was 4 sentences long. Earth acknowledges receipt of the Council's formal censure. We take note of the concerns raised by member species. Earth remains committed to the principles of galactic peace and cooperative governance. We will continue to act in accordance with our strategic assessments. That was it, 4 sentences, no denial, no protest, no demand for retraction. I read it twice, then forwarded it to First Speaker Orvin's office without comment. By the end of that week, the consensus in the Council corridors, among the analysts, the attachés, the junior diplomats who did the real work of keeping track of political weather, was that Earth had accepted the censure because we had no credible counterargument. We were, the theory went, trying to avoid further embarrassment by saying as little as possible. I let the theory breathe. I even quietly encouraged it in the way that experienced diplomats do, not through outright deception, but through the careful management of silence. When other ambassadors raised the matter in informal settings, I responded with polite brevity. When the Council's communications office asked if Earth intended to file a formal rebuttal, Owen, following my exact instructions, told them we were reviewing our options. We were not reviewing our options. Earth Command had already made its choices. I was simply maintaining the space those choices needed to work inside. It was during those weeks that I came to know Nora Ellis. She was the Vreth Dominion's cultural attaché, a position that officially involved managing the translation archives and coordinating cross-species educational exchanges. In practice, Nora had somehow ended up in this role because she was, by the standards of her species, unusually curious about other cultures. She was young for her position, with the precise, careful movements typical of Vreth diplomatic staff, but she had a way of asking questions that was less political and more genuinely interested. She found me one afternoon in the Primus Concourse reading room, a quiet space that most delegations avoided because the seats were designed for species with more legs than humans, and sat down across from me with a cup of something warm and said, without preamble, I want to understand something. I lowered the report I was reading. Go ahead. Why didn't you respond? Not the political answer, the real one. I looked at her for a moment. She was serious. There was no trick in the question. I had been reading people for a long time, and Nora did not have the face of someone laying a diplomatic trap. She was just asking. Tell me something first, I said. Have you ever watched a spider build a web? She tilted her head. I've seen the concept in the xenobiology archives. The spider doesn't chase its food, I said. It builds something and it waits, and the waiting is not passivity. The waiting is the strategy. Every thread is placed exactly where it needs to be, and when something flies into that web, the spider does not need to run after it. The work is already done. Nora considered that. You're saying the withdrawal was intentional. I'm saying, I answered carefully, that humanity does not make unintentional decisions at the strategic level. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, the council thinks you were afraid. I know. And you don't want to correct them. I picked my report back up. Not yet. She left shortly after, and I watched her go with the quiet assessment of someone who had just decided to trust a particular person slightly more than the usual baseline. Nora was sharp. Sharper than her official role suggested. That could be useful, or it could be a complication. In my experience, those two things were often the same. It was around that time that the intelligence reports started filtering through the Council's shared network, the kind of information that circulates between member species monitoring services